Peter, whose life took a turn when the woman he loved and trusted betrayed him in ways he never imagined. This story starts in a house like any other, with the trappings of a successful marriage and a life built on what seemed like a solid foundation. Peter, 45, a corporate strategist with a meticulous mind, had been married to Carol for 22 years. Together, they had climbed the corporate ladder, built a beautiful home, and crafted a life that seemed perfect from the outside. But as we all know, appearances can be deceiving. Peter loved order, and his life up until now had been a well-oiled machine. He'd designed their home with care and precision, especially the dining room, which, while rarely used, symbolized the success they had achieved together. The mahogany table, the delicate crystal chandelier, the fine china, all of it was supposed to represent a life well lived. But they rarely dined there. Instead, the kitchen became their true haven. Carol would cook, and Peter would go over work emails, the two of them silently coexisting as they each busied themselves with their individual tasks. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Peter first felt something shift. It had been happening gradually, little moments that made him uneasy, but nothing that seemed to require immediate attention. Until one night when Carol walked into his home office. Peter was at his desk, reviewing some reports, when the sound of her high heels clicking on the hardwood floor drew his attention. She stood at the doorway, calling out to him, her voice just a little more sharp than usual. He was immersed in his work, as he often was, and didn't immediately respond. After a moment, he called back, more cheerfully than he intended. "I'm here, Carol. Could you come in for a second?" She walked into the room, her expression a mix of impatience and something Peter couldn't quite place. Carol had always been composed, but tonight there was an edge to her demeanor that made him pause. She rolled her eyes as she crossed the room, dropping down onto the chair opposite his desk with a sigh. "What is it, Peter?" she asked, sounding put off. Peter had been waiting for this moment. There was something gnawing at him, a feeling he couldn't shake. It had started with little things, her distractedness, the way she would be too quick to leave for work or too slow to return his calls. There had been a change, and Peter was determined to address it. "I need to ask you something, Carol," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "And I need you to be honest with me. This isn't a hypothetical question. I want your real opinion." Carol raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing that something was different about tonight's conversation. "Go ahead, then," she said, her tone cautious. Peter took a deep breath, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk as he gathered his thoughts. "Tell me, in monetary terms, how much do you think intimacy with you is worth?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, Carol just stared at him. Her lips parted as if to say something, but no sound came out. The shock was evident on her face. "What?" she finally managed, the word escaping in a disbelieving whisper. Peter continued, not missing a beat. "I'm asking you to be honest, Carol. Do you think there's a value to intimacy? Different acts, different prices? I know escorts have different rates for different services. I don't know the exact numbers, but I imagine it's quite a bit. You'd have a better idea, wouldn't you? What do you think your value is?" Her eyes narrowed, her hands gripping the arms of the chair as she shifted uncomfortably. "Peter, what are you talking about? This is absurd. Why are you even asking me this?" "I'm serious," Peter insisted. "Should I factor in things like enthusiasm, skill level, or things like lingerie, mood lighting, candles? Should those be part of the price? Or are we talking about the type of place you'd choose? A nice hotel, a motel, or just a casual dinner date?" Carol blinked, her face flushing with both confusion and frustration. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, shaking her head. "You're talking nonsense. This isn't about money, Peter. It's about trust." Peter didn't stop there. He was on the verge of something and he could feel it. The truth was just around the corner. "So, you're saying this isn't about trust?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Then what is it about, Carol? Because it sure sounds like you've been spending a lot of time with someone else. Someone who isn't me." At that moment, Carol's expression shifted. She looked away, her eyes darting to the floor. There was something in the way she hesitated, a flash of guilt, before she met his gaze again. "Peter, it's not what you think," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's just dinner. I'm going to dinner with James tonight." Peter's heart skipped a beat. James. The name landed like a cold stone in the pit of his stomach. James was her co-worker, someone Peter had never fully trusted. He'd always felt there was something too familiar between them, something more than just a professional relationship. But tonight, hearing it come out of Carol's mouth, it finally clicked. The pieces fell into place. "James?" Peter repeated, his voice quiet but edged with disbelief. "You're going out to dinner with him? Alone?" Carol nodded, her lips tightening. "Yes, Peter. It's just dinner. We've been working on a project together, and we thought it would be easier to discuss it over a meal." Peter's mind was racing. This wasn't just about dinner. It wasn't just about a work project. This was something else entirely. The lies, the distance, the secrecy, it all made sense now. "Carol, you've been distant for weeks. I've been noticing the way you talk about him, the way you look at him. You're not fooling me anymore." She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her fingers twitching. "Peter, I swear, there's nothing going on between us. Nothing." Her voice cracked slightly, but the words felt rehearsed, as if she had said them over and over in her mind. "Really?" Peter asked, his voice low and controlled, but there was a storm behind his words. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're too comfortable with him. The late nights, the texts, the way you go on and on about him at work functions. Carol, I can see it. I've seen it." Her face flushed crimson now. She opened her mouth to respond, but then closed it again. There was no defense left. Peter had already seen through the veil. The truth was laid bare. "I don't want to hear any more excuses," Peter said, his voice cold. "I know what's going on, and if you think I'm going to sit here and pretend everything's fine, you're wrong." Carol's eyes filled with tears, but Peter wasn't interested in her remorse. Not anymore. He had been patient for too long, but this was the moment where everything would change. "If you go through with this dinner," Peter continued, "then consider this the beginning of the end, because I will never trust you again." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, the weight of the truth settling in. "I'll be waiting when you get back," Peter said finally, his voice steady but resolute. "But don't expect things to be the same. I'm done pretending." With that, Carol stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. She didn't say another word as she turned and left the room, leaving Peter alone in the silence. This was it, the beginning of the end. The air was thick with tension, the words spoken between them heavy with the weight of betrayal and broken trust. When Carol walked out of the room that night, Peter sat motionless for a long time. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the distant murmur of the city outside. He could hear her footsteps echoing as she grabbed her purse and slammed the door behind her. But no amount of noise could drown out the ringing in his ears, the sharp sting of betrayal that cut deeper than he'd ever expected. He had always been the kind of man who thrived on control, over his work, his home, his relationships. Every corner of his life had been organized, structured, and predictable. But now, Carol, the woman he had spent over 2 decades building a life with, had shattered that sense of order. It wasn't just the fact that she was seeing someone else. It was the way she had gone behind his back, the lies that had woven their way between them until there was nothing left but the hollow shell of what they had once shared. Peter had always prided himself on being level-headed, rational even in the face of the most challenging situations. But this was different. This was personal. This was a betrayal that cut straight to the heart. He had trusted Carol completely, but in the span of a single evening, that trust had evaporated. Now, as the hours dragged on, his mind began to turn darker, and a plan began to form. Carol arrived home late that night, around 1 a.m., her high heels clacking on the stone tiles of their entryway. She had been dreading this moment since she left Peter's office. The dinner with James had gone smoothly, too smoothly, if she were to be honest with herself. They had laughed, they had talked about work, but there had been a tension between them. Something more. Carol tried to tell herself it was nothing, but deep down she knew she was walking a dangerous line. When she had left the restaurant, she had been filled with a sense of unease, but she couldn't quite pinpoint why. As she entered the house, the lights in the living room flickered on. Peter was sitting in the same chair where he had been when she left, a silent, imposing figure. His face was unreadable, his eyes dark. He didn't say a word when she stepped inside. She closed the door behind her and stood there for a moment, her hand resting on the doorknob. "Peter," she began, her voice shaky. But he held up a hand to silence her. "Sit down," he ordered, his tone cold. Carol obeyed, her heart racing. This wasn't just a confrontation. This was something different. She could feel it in the air. Peter didn't move. He just watched her, as if calculating every little detail of her movements. After what seemed like an eternity, he spoke again, his voice calm but deadly serious. "Tell me, Carol," he said. "Do you think I'm stupid?" She swallowed hard. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play games," Peter snapped. "I know about James. You think I haven't noticed? The late nights, the whispers, the way you look at him like he's the only one who matters. Don't deny it, Carol. You've been playing me for a fool." Her stomach turned. "Peter, I swear it's not like that. You're making something out of nothing." "Am I?" Peter asked, standing up now, his face inches from hers. "You went to dinner with him, alone, and then you come back here expecting things to just go back to normal. Tell me, did he kiss you? Did you kiss him?" Carol recoiled at his words, her cheeks flushing. "Peter, no. Nothing happened." Peter smiled a dark, empty smile. "You want me to believe that? After everything? After you've been lying to me for months? Nothing happened?" The anger in his voice was rising, but Carol couldn't bring herself to argue anymore. She knew it was pointless. She had already crossed a line she couldn't come back from. Peter took a step back, his eyes narrowing. "I don't care if you did or didn't. That's not the point anymore." His voice was now low and menacing, the kind of tone that sent a chill down her spine. "The point is, you thought I wouldn't find out. You thought you could betray me, break my trust, and just waltz back in here like nothing happened. Well, that's not how this is going to end, Carol." Carol's breath caught in her throat. She had seen Peter angry before. There were moments in their marriage when his temper had flared. But this was something different. This was something she couldn't handle. The look in his eyes wasn't just hurt. It was something darker, more dangerous. She had no idea what he was planning, but she could feel the weight of his anger pressing down on her, suffocating her. "What are you going to do, Peter?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Are you going to divorce me? Are you going to ruin everything we've built?" Peter tilted his head slightly, a sadistic glint in his eye. "Oh, we'll see about that, Carol. You'll get your consequences. But they won't come in the form of a simple divorce. You deserve something much, much worse." Carol's eyes widened as the realization hit her. She knew Peter. She knew him well enough to understand that when he said something like that, he meant it. And from the look on his face, she could tell that the game had changed. Peter was no longer just a hurt husband. He was someone who had been wronged and was now calculating his revenge with cold, ruthless precision. The next few days were a blur for Carol. Peter barely spoke to her, his silence more suffocating than any argument could have been. He went about his daily routine as usual, but there was an underlying tension that seemed to have taken over the house. Carol was walking on eggshells, afraid of what would happen next, but Peter had been busy, very busy. It was 3 days later when Peter finally put his plan into action. It started small, subtle changes that Carol didn't immediately notice but would soon begin to feel. Peter had always been a meticulous man, and he used that to his advantage. The first thing he did was arrange for a few accidental meetings between himself and James. James had been calling Carol every day, checking in to make sure everything was okay after their dinner. Peter had intercepted those calls. He would speak to James in the calm, collected manner that always made him seem so unassuming, and then casually let slip just a few details about his interactions with Carol. Nothing too explicit, but just enough to get James thinking. The seeds of doubt were planted, and Peter was patient, letting them grow. James didn't know it yet, but Peter was already beginning to tear apart the life he thought he was building. It was a game now, one that Peter was playing with ruthless precision. Every time Carol came home, there was something different. A new email from James would appear on her phone, only for Peter to casually remind her about it. Every time Carol tried to call him out on his behavior, Peter would smile and brush it off, claiming he was just concerned for their marriage. But Carol could feel it. She could feel the walls closing in. Then, one night, Peter went a step further. He called James directly and invited him over for drinks, under the guise of a casual, getting-to-know-you type of conversation. James, being the man he was, agreed without question, thinking it would be a friendly meeting. But when he arrived, Peter was ready. "James," Peter said with a smile, "thanks for coming by. I've been wanting to talk to you about Carol." The conversation that followed was nothing short of a psychological trap. Peter subtly manipulated James into confessing things he never intended to reveal. By the end of the night, James was feeling guilty, confused, and completely unsure of where he stood with Carol. When James left that evening, he had no idea that Peter had planted the seeds of doubt in his mind. And for Carol, the realization came the following day when she discovered that James had started to distance himself from her. The once flirtatious co-worker who had been so eager to meet up for dinners was now avoiding her, pulling away with every text and email. By the time Carol realized what was happening, it was too late. The damage had been done. Peter had not only taken control of the situation, but had turned the tables completely. He hadn't just gotten revenge on her, he had orchestrated the unraveling of her entire relationship with James. In the end, Carol found herself standing in the ashes of everything she had taken for granted. Peter, the man she had betrayed, had exacted a cruel and calculated revenge that left her with nothing. James was no longer a part of her life, and her marriage, once a symbol of success, was nothing more than a hollow shell of what it had been. Peter, on the other hand, was calm, collected, and resolute. He had gotten his revenge, but there was no satisfaction in it. Only the cold satisfaction that comes from knowing that betrayal always carries a price. As for Carol, she was left alone, regretting every decision that had led her to this point. And that, dear viewers, is the price of trust. If you found this story compelling, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts, and let me know what you would have done in Peter's position. Trust is fragile, and once broken, it is nearly impossible to rebuild.